Let's talk a moment about the diagnostic shaders. You remember under my control panel, I have here a wireframe mode and a multicolor mode. So those are diagnostic shaders. You also find those, for example, inside the object display menu, and here is diagnostic shading. So what are the diagnostic shading tools useful for? Well, the wireframe mode, of course, makes sense. You can turn a scene into wireframe mode, but I can also now pick an object and say, well, shade this one, keep the rest, for example, as a wireframe mode. So it's easier for me to maybe see it through a model or focus on a particular object. You can also select everything and then shade it. If I go to the left view and zoom in a little bit, you will see that, for example, this detail here of the profile doesn't really look good, and something funny is happening up there. See, the geometry is kind of distorted. And that is because the tessellation is set to fast. So what does tessellation mean? The NURBS geometry is basically nothing else than a set of curves, pure math. And then that calculation is being used to create a polygon mesh model, which then your graphic card can actually shade so it looks solid. So what you see here is a very fine polygon mesh, and if tessellation is set to fast, the polygon mesh is rather coarse. Works in most cases, but like at the top of the sleeve geometry, it doesn't really work well. If we set it to accurate, the calculation will take a little bit longer, but as you can see, the shading model much better now represents actually the geometry of that curve. Also, you see, for example, that there is a color for the multicolor shader. So let's say I pick my fillet here and the other fillet there, and I click on the color. I could, for example, apply a different material to that geometry part. If I go into wireframe mode and go back into multicolor shaded mode, that color definition actually will remain. Let's rotate to the bottom part, and maybe this one I would like to give a green color, so I know that's kind of like the bottom plate. And then we also have a hoover, or in some programs it's called zebra, or horizontal and vertical shader. If I click on it, you see like a horizontal line zebra texture being projected over my geometry. And when I now rotate my view, you will see that the texture somewhat changes. So what's the point of this? Basically, it allows you, while rotating your view, to see if there are anywhere kinks or distortions inside the texture, because that would basically tell you that there's a problem or possibly a problem with the geometry. And if we zoom in here, see everything is very even. So the fillet, for example, seems to be really good. Here everything is nice and even, and you see, for example, right here where the surface basically is closed, so that at the top of my ring or the handle, you see that there's a small distortion happening, and that could maybe mean that even while it looks nice and round and soft, that maybe in reality, based on the math, it's maybe a little bit pointy. And that can be something that's just not really noticeable when you produce that model, because that effect is really minimal right now. This view is also not extremely accurate, so you should not trust it too much, but it can give you somewhat a good quick feeling to see if there are anywhere problems with your geometry.